Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. After conceding the top spot in economic growth among major economies to China for a year in 2017, India is likely to regain the position in 2018, with growth expected to accelerate to 7.3% in the year, according to the World Bank's Global Economic Prospects released on Wednesday. The World Bank report projected China's economy to further slow down to grow at 6.4% in 2018 from 6.8% in 2017. The multilateral institution, however, revised downward India's growth estimate for 2017 to 6.7% from 7% projected in October last year, blaming short-term disruptions from the newly introduced India's Statistics Office on Friday projected Indian economy to slow down to 6.5% in 2017-18 from 7.1% a year ago on the back of lingering impact of demonetization and disruptions caused by implementation of the goods and services tax. The World Bank said strong private consumption and services are expected to continue to support economic activity. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the World Bank's projection for India. Joining me on the program today are Priya Ranjan, senior journalist, Dr. Arvind Virmani, former chief economic advisor to the Government of India, and Abhinav Prakash, assistant professor, Delhi University. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Dr. Virmani, I'd like to begin with you, of course. What are the salient features of the World Bank's report?
See, there's one uncertainty because they are talking about 217. My guess is that's 2017-18. It's
for India, it's a fiscal year basically. So
yeah, because the IMF adjusts everything according to fiscal or calendar, but perhaps the World Bank doesn't. But that can be...
For India, it is 2017. Just to set the record straight, for India, it is 2017-18. For China, it's 2017.
Right, that's right.
So that's what it is, yeah.
The confused... I'm just explaining to your viewers because the IMF actually does the adjustments. They do separate for 2017 and 17-18. They give different numbers. So in this case, they haven't. That's the first point. The second point is that this reassertion, even after the CSO gave 6.5 of a 6.7 number, which is close to what my forecast and what I have reiterated even after the CSO. So what may interest readers, your viewers, is that how come if the official agency is 6.5, why is World Bank saying 0.2% higher? And that is the methodology they have to use. They put out set methodology. They don't make any adjustments. And part of this problem has come because if you remember, the budget timing has been advanced by 1 month from the previous budget and will continue like this, which has shortened the period for making the advance estimate by a month or more.
Yes.
So they've set in place a methodology which is very mechanical. So it really doesn't adjust for any, so it's whether the economy is going downwards or upwards, it kind of takes an average and keeps it flat, to put it very simplistically. So many of us, including private sector projection and clearly the World Bank, think that the second half of this financial year, there is going to be an uptick which is not accounted for in the CSO's estimates. But I agree with this estimate. And the other point which you made is on the consumption. Again, this is something which one has pointed out before, that because of the GST, the private consumption is still below trend. And many of us, most of us I think probably here, expect the GST effects to be gradually, the negative effects, short-term effects to go away over time or to weaken over time, and therefore to get back to the consumption trend. We can discuss the investment part of it subsequently. Yeah.
Sure. Priya Ranjan, what does the report say about 2018-2019?
Well, 2018-2019, it says that that the growth rate will improve somewhat, but
and India takes the top spot again. It says.
Yes, so China. See, basically, if you look at the previous projection of World Economic Prospects in previous years, typically World Bank tends to overestimate India's growth prospects and underestimate China's growth prospects. So when you compare it to the actuals, you find that invariably the actuals turn out to be less than what World Bank projects for India. and more than what World Bank projects for China.
But the difference is 50 bips. It's quite a bit between India and China.
Yes. So, yes, it is. But as you can see, for 2017 itself, the World Bank's earlier projection, now they have revised it downwards by 0.5 percentage points.
Yes.
So, why it is so, I don't know. But that is.
This last year there are special reasons, but again, please continue.
No, but I have been watching it for the last several years, and so I won't go by whether India would get back to becoming the fastest growing emerging economy, which is what the World Bank says in the long term. That is a prospect, to which I agree in the long term, because the Chinese growth is definitely slowing down.
Would you say Chinese growth has peaked and now it's only going to come down?
That's what the World Bank report says.
Yes.
Going forward, and I tend to agree with that. That the Chinese growth will slow down.
Sure.
And whether Indian growth would actually accelerate that's a major question.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what happens next year, whether India becomes the fastest growing economy, I'm not very sure about that.
Well, the World Bank says so, so let's wait and see what really happens.
The World Bank says so, but like this has happened this year, again, World Bank may land up.
Okay. I guess time will tell, and we'll have to wait and see. Dr. Virmani has got a smile on his face. He's nodding in disagreement, or he's shaking his head in disagreement. Something that you'd like to add, Dr. Virmani?
So this is the first time I'm kind of strongly disagreeing with my friend here, old friend. Firstly, the last year had very special circumstances. We all know because, demonetization, GST.
And that was not factored in.
So that is not an indicator at all. I'm sorry. Many of us were wrong, including it was at the first time ever in my life, it was at the bottom of my forecast. Never has it been there.
Sure.
Anyway, so the second point is very clear to me. I mean, to the extent that I'm willing to bet on it, that the Indian economy will accelerate.
Okay.
How much one can disagree. And the third point where I again disagree is that China is definitely slowing down. There's no question about it. And the only reason the last year we fell below is because of the two special circumstances.
Because of the two reasons, yes, that we've already spoken about. Let me bring in Abhinav, Prakash now into the picture. What does the World Bank report mean for India?
Well, the World Bank report has basically said that over the next 10 years, our average growth rate will be around 7%. And the report says, as we were discussing, that it is going to be the fastest growing economy in the world. We'll have to wait and see. But it points out something very important. It says that the effects of GST is going down, negative effects are wearing off. The global economy is also projected to grow, which is going to lift the exports from India. And it also points that increased government spending in the infrastructure, in the service delivery, especially like you have the electrification and gas delivery, that is giving a boost to the Indian economy, and also it says the internet connectivity. But it also flags certain important issues. It says that education and health in the face of the large youth population in India remains a constraint. And without meaningful labor reforms, without educational reforms, and without boosting the female work participation, Indian economy cannot meet the potential. So it is also saying there is a prospect, there is a potential of the growth, but there are constraints which are not being looked into as much seriously as they should have been, despite the other reforms on the other front.
Sure. How serious are these constraints that the World Bank has raised, Dr. Virmani? Do you believe that they need to be addressed at the earliest?
So the set of reforms you didn't mention, maybe it's there. The land is another one.
Yeah.
Where there's been a lot of research by again an old friend of mine named Mijaz Ghani. The question is always of sequencing. How important any particular reform is at any particular time, and their opinions can differ. But there's no doubt that if you want to accelerate closer to 8 or above 8, one, and second, generate more and better quality jobs. It's not just employment, but better quality jobs. Then certainly these reforms are quite essential. So if you want both those things,
Sure.
you want to accelerate above, let's say 7.5. Again, I'm trying to build consensus rather than, I think, beyond 8. But okay, if you want to do more than 7.5 on a sustained basis, plus we want to generate enough good quality jobs so that people say, yes, the opportunities are again arising as they did after the 91 reforms, then clearly these reforms will become quite essential.
You know, if you look at the World Bank report, it says over the next 10 years, India is going to grow at a rate of about, on an average of 7%, whereas the other countries are going to be growing at 6 and 6.2 and 5.8. So isn't it considerable growth growing at 7% for 10 years?
Yes, certainly 7% over a decade gives you a doubling, every less than a decade actually. Between 8 and 9 years, it will give you a doubling of the GDP. But the question, as I said, is not just of growth, but growth combined with enough good quality employment, right? I'm not really talking about just employment. Employment will be there, it will always be generated somehow or the other.
So that's what we need to concentrate on.
Good quality employment, you need a good structure of policies plus the institutions, kind of things we occasionally discuss about reducing leakages, corruption, more efficient governance, etc., public goods. Again, I don't know how much they mentioned those sort of things, but I guess they are focusing more on the policy because the employment issue is back in the table these days because of elections and other things which have happened recently.
Sure. Mr. Dash, what has the World Bank report said about GST? It seems to have given, GST and the reforms conducted by the Modi government a thumbs up, at least for now.
Absolutely. And if you go back to the ease of doing business report of the World Bank, the dramatic improvement in India's ease of doing business ranking was also primarily attributed to this reform of GST. That clearly got India so many points. But GST is a huge reform, and it has had its temporary impact on growth. But as the report itself points out, that is tapering off, and in the medium term, GST is going to prove a boon. And if you look at World Bank's earlier estimates, they estimated that GST alone could contribute 1.5 percentage point to the growth rate.
Sure.
And so GST is a big reform. It makes one nation, one tax. But in the form that GST has been introduced, clearly there is so much scope for improvement. And GST is still evolving in India, and we are open now to improving the GST system to actually make it one tax, one nation kind of a thing, and to make GST even more simpler. So as GST evolves, when you look at the medium term, it's going to be a real boon for the economy.
Sure.
There is no doubt about it. Now, just to talk a little bit about the potential growth that World Bank is talking about of 7% or 7% over the next 10 years. Now, what is this potential coming from? If you look at the report, it comes from what the World Bank says is a rare for a country where the working age population in India is growing, whereas it is shrinking in
rest of the world.
Now that is essentially from there. So the so-called demographic dividend that India's growth potential is coming from, and so the bank says that that kind of growth would be possible provided the reforms that are required in the labor market, including in education, in health, which is essential part of the labor market reforms, that will sustain that kind of growth. In fact, if those reforms happen and take speed, then this 7% potential growth rate could actually be double digit.
Double digit as well. Okay.
Potential.
Okay. Great.
So over the next 10 years. But unfortunately, those reforms are nowhere to be seen.
But strong reforms have been taken over the last 3 years, and we can expect them to be taken again in the near future.
Today, for instance, the cabinet decision.
Yeah, on FDI.
On FDI in retail, that's so much potential in terms of creating what is called well-paid jobs for young educated kids coming out of school, graduating out of school, and looking into a future. And you know 30,000 people every day joining the workforce. So they have to be. So in terms of creating well-paid employment, those kind of policy reforms would be essential.
Sure. I think we stressed upon that. I'll just come to you, Dr. Virmani. I want you to talk about the opening up of the FDI, the decision that was taken by the cabinet today. But before that, let me go across to Abhinav, Prakash. You know, what's working for India at the moment?
Well, as the report itself says, and he's mentioned that your demographic dividend is your biggest asset at the moment, and the reforms which has been taken, especially the GST and the infrastructure push, is actually giving you a uptick in the growth rate. However, what the bank discuss and what we normally discuss is the policies of the center, whereas what we have to really focus on now with increasing decentralization, what is happening at the level of the states, because the governance at the state level is really not improving as it should be, and their economic policies are, I will say, escape the kind of scrutiny which we give to the center. So lots of these economic reforms, they matter when they're actually implemented on the ground, and that is largely in the hands of states and also in the hands of your local governance in the large cities. So that is where we have to really focus. Obviously, when the world economy is projected to grow in the next year, we are going to really benefit from that, from rising exports and other things, but we really have to invest. We really have to invest and do a lot to decrease the logistic costs in the country. And GST is a long way towards achieving that aim, but we still have to do a lot in that sense.
Sure. You know, Dr. Virmani, Priya Ranjan Dash spoke about double-digit growth. Is that, an idea that is possible? How do we achieve double-digit growth? And also, a word on the FDI, the decision taken on FDI in retail today, how is it going to help us?
So let me start with the latter one. A lot of people think of technology in terms of hard things like machines and things like that. But a lot of technology, the big productivity improvements, many of them, for example, in the service sector, have come from organization, and management, new systems of organizing things and managing them. So it's not just technology in the sense we are used to it, a chemical plant where it's all technology, but in the way things are done. So that is where the GST, why actually there has been a better reception outside India on this GST than internally our own professionals. You compare economists across the world, their comments and ours, they are expecting big things from it because it basically changes the structure of the overall Indian economy.
Yes.
And they believe, given past history of other countries, that there's going to be a huge amount of innovation connected with it in terms of these so-called soft things which I mentioned, but they are really technology. So that's connecting the two things, why people are so optimistic that there's bound to be an increase in growth and productivity in the next 3 years at least. And then when we talk about 10 years, we have to come to all these other reforms also. Sorry, your second your basic point was this double-digit growth.
Double-digit growth.
Now, unfortunately, I have been in this business for 20 years. So whenever things start to improve, people start talking about double-digit, and I always warn them, please, first show me a sustained increase to 8 to 9%, then I will discuss double-digit. So I will say the same thing again. When we are talking about right now of 7.5 in the next couple of years, or even for 5-10 years, to talk about double-digit right now is highly premature. So, but 8 is ambitious enough. For the last year, we've had an average growth of, let's say, over the last 5 years of 7% or thereabouts. And to talk about 8 in a sustained 10-year kind of framework is ambitious enough. And we will have to do all those things which he has mentioned and we keep discussing here.
Okay, sure. Talking about reforms now, Mr. Dash, what are the reforms that have worked for us thus far and what needs to be done in the near future?
Well, I would say, from the bank's report, if you look at it, now clearly the immediate requirement to accelerate growth would be to kickstart private investment. And as we know, private investment has been depressed in recent years. That is primarily because you have a problem with the banking sector, and you have a problem with on the demand side. There has been a demand compression in the economy. So most industries, the capacity utilization is low. When the capacity utilization is low, that is that much of less incentive to make investment, fresh investment. That is one. The second is, in terms of investment financing, the financial sector is in a jam at the moment, with saddled with huge bad debt. So the balance sheets of both the corporate sector and the financial sector, banks and all, are quite stressed. As a result, there is no lending activity happening, and the investment, private investment,
talking about this particular issue, the World Bank has said recapitalization.
So I was just pointing out to
that.
Yes. So I was just pointing out to that. Yes, recapitalization, the steps that the government has announced, that is good. But I'm not very happy with the timing of it. I would, the banks would require to be recapitalized. But there is a view as to whether the government should be recapitalizing banks from now first, or whether the banks should be diluting, or the government should be diluting its stakes. That means bank raising capital from the market on their own first, and then government stepping in later, after the banks are able to establish market worthiness. Then so I am one who would like the banks to go to market rather than the government putting in money into the bank as a first step. The first step should be the banks going into the market. But the question is, it's not so much recapitalization immediately that is required, because what is happening is the banks are lending. The banks lending growth, as we know, is at 60-year low. So the banks are just not lending. So their business is not expanding. When their business is not expanding, they need that much of less capital expansion. So you need, eventually they will require capital to be expanded. Now, if fresh capital is even pumped in, because the banks have a huge bad debt problem, to the
NPA problem
bail out the banks, then that's not a very good situation.
NPA problem needs to be addressed, is what you're suggesting. Quick closing comments from all my guests now, starting with Abhinav, Prakash. Of course, what does the World Bank report say about the global climate for 2018?
Well, it is optimistic about the global increase in the economic activity, but it says that is in the short run only, because the World Bank says in the long run there are lots of risks which are associated with the global economy. So we will see this uptick in the growth rate in the financial year, but for the medium term and the long run, the World Bank is not really very optimistic about the global economy.
Uptick in 2018, what does that mean for India, Dr. Virmani?
So one of the important questions which arises, are we prepared to take advantage of this 1 or 2 year or whatever gap of advantage we have? And I'm afraid I don't think we are, because for the last 7 years to almost a decade, we have had no reforms in the import-export system, the EXIM system, the import tariffs, the export duties. We are still running on the system.
Midterm export review, of course, suggested a few things.
But those are very traditional small steps. We need a thorough, for example, the whole agricultural system, and I have personal experience of sitting on many committees and short-term management. It is totally ad hoc. It's been for 7 years, 10 years. It's not new. It has always been ad hoc. We need a structure now which is semi-automatic, so that the farmer knows. We still treat, I think, the farmer like a child. He is not a child. You give him a proper structure and you empower him, he will take advantage of it. So anyway, without getting deeply into that, I think that we need a much more extensive reform of that whole structure to be able to take full advantage of it. Not that we will not benefit. We will certainly benefit from this. But I think we will still fall short in terms of joining the supply chains, etc., if we don't forms.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank my guests, Priya, Ranjan, Arvind, Virmani and Abhinav, Prakash for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. The takeaways from the discussion, of course, states need to pull up their socks. We need to undertake labour reforms in the near future, and we also need to take advantage of the uptick in the global economy in 2018 and be prepared for what's happening there. That's it from me. See you again next time.